I can tell you the rule against perpetuities, and I still don't understand the difference between a picture and a movie. All right.
It matters.
It matters. Oh, it matters.
Hello and welcome to Castle of Horror, the show dedicated to horror movies and awesomeness. This week we have a standalone episode inspired by our recent discussion of Friday the 13th. This is the 1945 film And Then There Were None, based on the play and novel by Agatha Christie. Bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have seen it. So warning, spoilers ahead. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, editor of this summer's Castle of Horror anthology and the upcoming Young Captain Nemo Quest for the Nautilus. With me from Austin is Mr. Drew Edwards, writer of the long-running underground comic series Halloween Man, winner of the 2018 Best of Austin Award, and nominee for 2019. Welcome, Drew.
Whoa, nominee for 2019. I had something glib I was going to say, and you completely threw me off and put butterflies in my stomach. So,
you rendered him speechless. It's amazing.
Yeah, I know.
So yes, nominated for 2019. So we will we'll be pulling for you. Honestly, that's because that'd be really cool. But
Much
you were
obliged.
the winner in 2018, Best of Austin for comic book creators. So from the Austin Chronicle. And that other voice you hear in Los Angeles, Adam Foshko, has worked on some of the most successful interactive franchises of all time, whether it's Call of Duty, Destiny, Skylanders, Shrek, Transformers, or James Bond. Adam's work with these stories, characters, and worlds has set them apart and continues to delight millions. Say hello, Adam.
Hi, how are you all tonight? Good to be back.
It is so cool to have you back. You and I hang out in LA all the time. Like I'm there, it seems like every 8 weeks or so, and we hang out, but you have not been on the show in a while, and it's really neat.
We've missed you.
We missed you a lot. And
Thanks.
Finally, also in Denver, as always, color commentary from the one and only attorney, Julia Guzman of Guzman Immigration of Denver. Say hello, Julia.
Hello, Julia.
Hello. Okay. All right.
Right? That's what I think.
It so doesn't that I don't even. It just washes right over.
You don't even roll your eyes anymore, Jason?
It's Burns and Allen is what it is.
I know.
Yeah, no,
for sure.
Oh no, I can hear him rolling his eyes, Julie.
Yeah.
No, but
he does. He audibly rolls his eyes usually.
I really? Yeah. I'm such a huge fan of Burns and Allen, by the way. It is so interesting to watch those things and to see a 50-year-old George Burns, and he's so. And it is funny that we would go, George Burns was young because he was 50 years old, but he does. He's so full of vim and vigor. So anyway,
I just have to say really quick before we move on that if anybody didn't watch the Emmys but has it on the DVR, just watch the beginning, like the first few minutes through Ben Stiller's thing, because Bob Newhart has a guest spot and he's so funny. Anyway, that's all.
It really is. Okay. And Then There Were None is a 1945 film adaptation of Agatha Christie's best-selling mystery novel of the same name, directed by Renee Clare. It was released in the UK as 10 Little Indians, because that's what the book was called over there. Let's get, Ed, where did we see this? I'm trying to remember where this one came up. I know that we rented it. So it's readily available. This movie is in the public domain now. You can find it anywhere. And as we said, Julia was the one who said we need to watch it because we had such a good time watching Friday the 13th. And everyone said, well, if you want to see the proto Friday the 13th. So let's get opening thoughts. Let's do it this way. Let's go Adam, Julia, Drew, and then I'll just take us into the topics. So, Adam, you're our guest. Let's get us started. Give us a couple of minutes. What are your opening thoughts on And Then There Were None?
Well, I mean, this is a thing that I think we always have heard about. At least I always have. I remember being, even in high school, I think I was even in this is a great play in high school, by the way. Samuel French took it up later, and I think we did 10 Little Indians, which had a fairly dark ending for high school, which was hilarious. But, I'd never seen this particular picture, and it is a picture, by the way. So from the time and from the way it's set up.
Remind me again what's the differences between a picture and in your usage, and I think it's a fairly common usage. What's the difference between a picture and a movie, or is it a picture and a film? What do these words mean?
Well, look, a film can be small. A film can be intimate. Stanley Kubrick tended to make films. Kubrick did not make pictures. I mean, he did not necessarily make movies. He definitely made films, right? I tend to think of those things as intimate and having multiple meanings. There's a lot of depth, I think, to a film.
Okay.
Very cinematic. I tend to sort of categorize them that way. A movie I don't think there's any doubt that Raiders of the Lost Ark is a movie, right? That's, that can be sprawling, it can be action, it can be modern, it can be a lot of different things. It has scope. But I think, this is a picture, I think partly because of the fact that it's British and it's from a particular time. I tend to sort of categorize these things that's definitely a picture, like an RKO picture, like you kind of go, oh, these are a picture. And I think that's just the way that I loosely categorize things. And I think that, they could be drawn in dotted lines.
So in your mind, film would be like Goddard kind of stuff, new wave, meaningful, fancy art. Movie is whatever the heck, and a picture is like Hollywood, flashy, the money's on the screen.
Right, or of a particular time and a place when, there was the picture industry, it has a historical aspect to it as well.
I love this. I don't mean to put you on the spot. I just find it fascinating that these words that there are meanings to them, and you're right. People use them.
It's subjective, right? You could argue one way or another, but I would say that if you look at you look at Kubrick, or you look at other serious filmmakers, I think they're largely making films. I think that Ridley Scott tends to make films. I think it just depends. Like Blade Runner is a film.
Huh.
It's just that sort of thing. I think when you brought up Godard, I think that was a really good example. That's just the way that I tend to categorize them.
But like Back to the Future.
Back to the Future is a movie.
Wow. This is a fun game.
Yeah. I mean, it ends up in a fist fight somewhere when you have serious film people. Somebody brings up Zero Mostel and a funny thing happened on the way to the forum, and you're left with a fist fight.
Right. Okay. Anyway, continue.
Musicals are a different category, by the way.
I got you off topic.
There was a game on SNL called Geek Dweebers Spaz. I feel like that's what the game would be. It'd be like.
Yeah, and actually you have to incorporate a
movie
drinking
picture film
with it too to make it
right. Exactly.
Anyway, and I'm and Drew may actually have extra color to actually put on this as well, but this is sort of the way I categorize it. But this is definitely a picture from a time, and it's an original, which really makes it sort of interesting. When you even think about how enduring this particular story is, from novel to stage to picture to other, whether it's teleplays or films like even Murder by Death later on in the 70s, parody. It has endured for some reason, and I think is become a kind of an archetype. So it's interesting to see it in its original form, or its near original form.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what to expect because I'd never seen it, and we all know kind of how it plays out and how it ends, even if we don't remember it too clearly. But I still find myself watching it, wondering how they were going to do this, and we've seen it as a root of other now. Can we even say neoclassical horror? The things that whether it's Friday the 13th or whether it's, I don't know.
I would go so far as to call it classic horror. I think that's classic horror, honestly. And I'll let when Drew does his opening thoughts, he can tell us what labels he would give to stuff from the 40s. I think he would call that golden age horror, but I really don't know.
Yes.
But I think it all goes to inform that in some way. And so it was really great to see this in its purest state. I was glad to see it. It was really interesting to sort of to see it unvarnished, I would even say. I can't tell you that I really felt enormously satisfied with the ending, which I thought it was really weird. Like they went to camp in the last few seconds, which I didn't know what to do with, but I felt like in general, like that was just they cheaped out there at the end. But I was really happy to see it as it was. That's just my overall take on it.
Julia.
So yeah, we talked about kind of what were the origins of slasher movies, and this film came up. And interestingly, it's like nothing, what is it? What's the expression? Nothing new under the sun. This wasn't even. It's like this is actually owes its plot to yet another story called The Ninth Guest, apparently, which is a 1930 play with this framework of people being brought together by an unknown host who proceeds to kill them one by one. So it's just kind of who knows where they got their idea. But this film is based on the Agatha Christie play, which is based on the Agatha Christie novel. So it kind of takes that little detour. But I really enjoyed it. I think it's very interesting. It felt to me more like a Poirot story than it did like Friday the 13th, but it was pretty neat. And yeah, I agree with Adam that the very, very ending is a little odd. But yes, I'm trying to think what else there's to say at the moment. It's fun to see, all this kind of beautiful, just everything is so elegant and just, I don't know. I love looking at the past through a lens like this. This takes place is filmed in 1945. So we're talking about the very end of World War II. So I think it'd be interesting to explore a little bit how that impacts this film and the story. Apparently one way it impacted it is that the ending is not as depressing because Agatha Christie didn't want to bum everybody out too much because of the war. So so that would be at least one way, but I'm not sure we can talk about if there's other ways. Sorry?
Because Germany.
Because Germany, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Wow. All right.
The Germans.
Thank you very much, Julia. Drew, what about you?
I really, really enjoyed this. This certainly marks off a lot of happy spots for me. Certainly, I like movies a lot from the 30s and 40s, as listeners from this podcast know. It reminds me, the only, Julia talked about the stage play that this might have been, some elements have been borrowed from. It makes me think a lot about the Old Dark House, which has to be considered a direct ancestor of this. And I just, again, happy spots, big spooky mansion, black and white, macabre atmosphere. And I actually think this is very different from Poirot's story. I am most familiar with Poirot. I'm not an Agatha Christie buff by any means, but Poirot is something it would be the thing that I am most familiar with from her work. This to me has a much more sinister, cynical atmosphere to it than I would say Poirot's story. I liked that about it. It certainly, kept me very much, on my feet. Like I have not had not seen this movie before. I was very enthralled by it. It kept me in suspense. But I would say much more of veering, even though mystery and horror are cousins to one another, definitely veering into horror a lot with the way this comes together. Although, as far as how it compares to Friday the 13th, certainly this does not have any of the supernatural campfire story elements that Friday the 13th. There's no talk of curses. There are no ghosts. There are no monsters.
That's true.
This isn't that. That is not what Friday the 13th took from this. What Friday the 13th took from this is a movie that was very much focused on body count, which for a movie from this time period, oh boy, it's like even the Universal monster movies don't tend to kill that many people.
Yeah.
This racks up quite a big body count for a movie of its time period. Although most of the deaths appear off screen, you don't actually see many of the murders, but I thought this was a great movie. I just really enjoyed it. Again, it just hit me in so many. I would call this an Old Dark House movie. I just name dropped the Old Dark House, which I totally do. I would definitely call this an old Dark House movie.
I like that.
The way this film begins, you have a whole bunch of people who have been gathered together and are carried on a boat out to a small island. And as soon as they get there, they realize that they have all been invited and they're all a little unclear on why they've been brought there. And what I find funny is that there are a whole bunch of themes going on, simultaneously. There is camp, like Adam mentioned, and there's a lot of camp towards the end, but there's a certain element of lightweight camp going throughout, and to me that's like very, very, very much a feel of the 40s. Because if you go look at like the Phantom of the Opera remake from 1943, it has exactly the same kind of like, we'll be a little serious and then we're going to have some like lightweight music. I'm sorry. Yeah. With Herbert Lom. Yes.
Okay,
And so they sort of lean a little towards the creepiness, and then you lean back with a more lightweight character and back and forth. And that's just the nature of these slick, good-looking, expensive 1945 films. But the first thing that we should probably mention is just the resilience of this story, like how many times this has been told. This is the 1945 one, and it actually benefits from having been put together just 2 years after Agatha Christie's own play. But I have not seen any other versions of this, but apparently there was one as recent as 2015 from the BBC. There was there was
Charles
a major
Dance actually is the judge.
Oh my, yeah. No, I mean,
and it's very cinematic, actually quite cinematic.
I know that doesn't surprise me. I mean, the more recent like big BBC productions look like movies, basically. The new
and it's a bit like it's almost like it's not quite like the take on Sherlock, where you have this sort of reimagination of it, but you're looking definitely at a very modern. It's a modern lens of a time, of a period.
I've definitely got to check that out. And really there was a version in the 60s, there's a version in the 70s, there's a version in 89. I think you mentioned there's a Bollywood version.
Gumdam. It's hilarious. It's a comedy and it has songs. So use your imagination.
Well, and you know what I thought of when I was watching it? I thought of House on Haunted Hill, which is exactly the same story.
Sure.
All these guys have been invited to a party, and they all have different reasons for wanting to be there. And in this case,
but I really wanted a life-size marionette skeleton to come out of a tub of acid. I mean, that's really what I wanted at the end of this. I just didn't get it.
But what's wonderfully cool in this one is that you do have this motif of, they have a little Lazy Susan statue on the I guess it's the dining room table or somewhere. It's some table in this mansion that they're staying at. And oh, what a mansion, man alive. Anyway, but before we get to that, this little Lazy Susan, it's ceramic, it's polished, it has 10 little Indians, and every time one of them gets killed, somebody smashes one. It is the coolest, most ridiculous motif ever, because it means one character is running around ready to go whack as soon as somebody dies.
Yeah, so if I were in charge of this island, I would have just said, hey, I'll tell you what, let's all just sit around the table and stare at the Indians, and then like, if anybody has to go to the restroom, we go two at a time, but everybody else just stares at the Indians.
Yes.
And then nobody will die because we'll all be together and we'll know that nobody's dying because the Indians will still be not broken.
That's one of the funniest things. This is one of the first movies ever to deal with the problem of, if you've got a whole bunch of people who, their better judgment would suggest exactly that they start playing Pictionary all in the same room and stay there all night long. How are you going to contrive to have
there's no reason for anybody to go to a bedroom. I mean, people are dying. It's one night. Just everybody hang out, or whatever many nights, maybe.
Right.
But anyway, just everybody hang out in the living room and sleep on the chairs or the couch or whatever.
I think these people are far too stuffy and
yes,
upper, because there's a lot of upper class.
Yeah, talk about the class stuff, Drew, because that's fascinating to me.
Well, there's a lot of holdover from colonialism in this, and sort of the British Empire, step upper lip, that kind of mentality. I think the best example of that, the sort of perfect embodiment of that in this story, is we have this really ancient general who has allegedly sent his wife's lover off on a suicide mission or something, and we don't know precisely what war he was a general in, presumably World War One, but who knows?
Yeah.
And he's kind of the stand-in for that era of England, and like much of the manners of this movie feels like that. Like even though this is 1945, this has an almost Victorian
Oh, yes.
feel to it.
Well, there's the butler that they have, who his wife is one of the first people murdered, and they're like, oh, well, gosh, Jeeves, whatever the heck his name is. They're like, that's terrible that your wife's been murdered. So don't think a thing about preparing dinner for us tonight, anyway. But
the poor butler keeps on working. Like that's, I think, the best example.
He's what lets you know that you're in a comedy. Honestly,
well,
true.
No, I mean, I was actually going to say I can speak to how realistic that is. That part of the fact that the servant is treated as not human, subhuman, because I've definitely witnessed that. Having been in environments where, not in the United States, but in Latin America, where people there's a servant class and the servants live in the house. They really don't have, like, the idea of them having a day off is kind of like, well, yeah, kind of they have a day off, but where are they going to go? I mean, their family's in another place and, whatever. They can't possibly get there. So basically, even though their day off, they're maybe go into town for a little bit, but that's it. But there's no concept that they have a life that gets to exist outside of what they do for the people in the household. So I thought that was actually quite believable, that they'd be like, oh, go ahead and take the night off and then we'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah.
I mean, my favorite part of the movie is when he finally has had it and he starts to get drunk. But he can't even rebel properly because he's like drunk and surly, but he's still serving them and apologizing for serving them cold meat.
Yeah.
It's just, if there was any reason to show that these people needed to die, this is their cruelty to this butler is the best example.
But that's one of the most interesting things, though, is that cruelty. This is what it takes. Tremendous ability to see yourself, to be aware of cruelty that is in the air you breathe. That, in other words, if it has never dawned on you ever in a million years to extend to the butler the same sort of assumption that he's going to be rattled by life's ups and downs as you would be, that if you've never ever learned that lesson, you're not going to learn it right now. And that's just I'm not saying that it's forgivable. I'm just saying that I would kind of not expect anything else from them necessarily. But it's so, we, the American audience watching it, and I actually don't know how it plays with an English audience because I'm not English. The American audience watching it, most of us are middle class going to Hollywood, right? So going to watch Hollywood movies, and so we don't have butlers, so we see the silliness of the upper class, and so we tend to laugh. And I know it is being played for comedy. The music tells me it's being played for comedy, the heightened personality, the heightened performances, and so forth. So this is intended to make us, the middle-class audience, feel better about ourselves.
And actually, if I may, there's something else in there too. I mean, there's the manners of it, which, we're looking at it through a very particular lens. But then there's also another way you can take it is, what's interesting is, we are looking at what we assume are 10 guilty people, 10 people who are somehow deserving to be killed in some particular way, and yet they have to be accessible in some way. They have to be has to be something to them where we actually can, it makes them worth watching. But also, I mean, in a way, not deserving to be killed, but some of them they come off as sort of terrible people in a bunch of ways, and you don't really miss them. They're like, it's one of those things where I halfway wonder if somebody really was very sympathetic to the butler and his wife and everything else, and really operated outside the lines of the stiff stiff lanes of society and those norms, and they were killed, you might feel a certain amount of indignation because they just wouldn't. You'd be like, well, they didn't deserve
that's
that. They
interesting.
actually were kind of nice folks. So I kind of halfway wonder if that's being played a little bit as well. They're like, they're not.
Yeah, they have to be jerks.
I just don't think that people saw them as being jerks to the butler. I just don't think at that time. I feel like they probably were just like, yeah, that tracks.
I
So I don't.
think
I
that's
disagree.
probably something that the people who made the Friday the 13th movies looked at, because like often in Friday the 13th, the first people who get bumped off are guilty of some sort of social infraction.
Yeah, being jerks.
I do think people watching even back in the 40s probably thought they were being a jerk to the butler, because they wouldn't have played it for laughs that he gets fed up but then he can't even fully rebel. Like that seems like a bit of a, and it was sort of like having your cake and eating it too, because like you get to experience the glamour of these like swell people in their nice evening clothes having a wonderful party that somebody in the 1940s probably wouldn't be able to get to go to. But then you get to have revenge on them because they're all being murdered.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk. I definitely believe that there is a huge fantasy element to this. Huge, huge, huge. Yeah, they're all crappy people, but I mean, for the most part, and especially since in the end we have them be, we have a couple of heroes, lovers, in fact, who can be heroes together. For the most part, you're getting to walk in their elegant shoes. You're getting to take this boat trip. I mean, when's the last time? It doesn't happen to me. It doesn't happen to you that somebody sends you a letter and says, come out to my mansion on a small island where we'll have a cocktail party. I mean, that's a crazy fantasy. And so it's, when you think about it, the whole concept just makes you lean forward and feel giddy, because that you're in the realm of the interesting and not every day. They're
Well,
going to
and
go out
now
there with their
if
trunks.
somebody did write me and tell me to come to a thing, I wouldn't go because I've seen too many horror movies.
Yeah, I'd send somebody else.
Yeah, I would definitely go, because I mean, just how awesome would this be? Well, and they're all. I find it fascinating that, for instance, they all dress for dinner. Like the guy who's a bachelor, he needs somebody to help him, fix his tie and everything in his coat. And which because for the formal dinner at night, but for the regular meals every day, they wear mere suits. I just find it fascinating. All of this is Hollywood.
But I think that's how it was. I mean, if you look at the pictures from 1945, nobody's ever not dressed up, and
That's a really
they're
super good
often
point.
dressed up more later on.
Well, I mean, yeah, I have thought about that. You look at pictures from like the Depression, right? And people standing in line, or people wandering around, or doing odd jobs, or selling apples, and everybody's always in a suit. I find that fascinating.
Yeah.
That's you're totally right. There's a bit of there's a formality that people wear like a second skin in society back then. And and it is very much alive in this Agatha Christie movie. And I will tell you, I have no idea whatsoever when it died. Like, what is the point? When is the point where we could switch to business casual at a regular
I feel like
middle class job?
seeing James Dean, like I think that whole era of like, that's pretty cool. He's just wearing jeans and an undershirt. That's awesome. People are started going, maybe we should just do that. Like, why? I don't know. I'm just making that up. I have no idea.
In England, or do you mean just on the world?
In the Western world,
Yeah.
like when did we decide that you could wear, say, chinos and a golf shirt to work? And it wasn't crazy. Like when did that sort of take hold? I know that by the 80s,
I mean, I think the 60s are when you have everybody like, the sexual revolution, and then the bra burning, and then you got the 70s. I feel like there's just kind of that even the people who were more conservative and formal went, okay, well, if they're going to do that, the least I can do is get rid of this tie all the time.
70s, aka when ugly.
Say again?
The 70s had wide ties. When you started seeing film executives, wearing Peter Max clothes, which was a designer of a time, very bright colors, very, like bell bottoms and things like that. I mean, it seemed like it was the 70s. There was like ugly got uglier. Like like eyes got wider. And the browns and the blues mixed together really became sort of terrible, and then it became hip and cool to sort of do the other stuff. And it really, I think, took a hold probably in the late 70s, really in the 80s. It seems like golf shorts, like Izods, you could actually wear Izods in different places.
Well,
in
it's like the sort of stuff you'd see Rodney Dangerfield wearing in Caddyshack became the default uniform for most men over a certain age. And look, I will be the first. Like, I mean, one only needs to see me at a convention or something. Like, I hate.
I can't
modern
wait
fashion
to hear where this is going.
With, like,
you can't.
Modern fashion. He said modern fashion.
I hate it.
You hate it?
I hate it. I hate how casual everything is. I hate it. I want to burn it down. Like, I guess, it's something because, like, look, it's like I feel like a tug of war with it because, like, on one level, I believe people should be able to do what they want and put what they want on their body.
But they should want to dress nicer than they do.
Fuck grunge. I lived through grunge. I like some of the music.
Oh, grunge.
Horrible aesthetic.
At first, I thought you said fuck brunch, and I was like, what do you have against brunch, Drew? And what does that have to do with this?
No.
That's kind of hardcore.
Brunch is forever, but grunge should have stayed in the 90s. It's not a good aesthetic. I hate that it's coming back. I really like, so, like, again, wear what you want to wear, whatever, I will bite my barbed tongue when we're hanging out.
Yeah.
But what I always get wherever I go, why are you so dressed up? Why are you so dressed up? Why are you wearing a tie? Why do you have a suit jacket on? Why are you so dressed up? This has been the chorus of my life since probably my mid-20s. And it's because I watch a lot of movies from this time period, or things that were influenced by movies from this time period. And I just like that better. I feel like that what was wrong with this? Why did we have to all become so fucking slouchy? To where we have to basically be walking around in our underwear most of the time. Like, I literally it's like nails on a chalkboard to me. Like, I hate modern fashion. It's so ugly. And the 70s, it's a little better now than it was in the 70s. 70s to me might be the ugliest point of the 20th century. Lots of hideous pattern. It's terrible. Sorry, Jason. I know you like that time period.
To be sure, I am fascinated by the look of movies from that era, but I wouldn't at all suggest, oh no, this is the pinnacle of fashion. Truly not. So I'm totally with you. So and actually, come to think of it, to get back to Peter Max for a second, think about, like, Mad Men. He was totally realistic and often wearing bowling shirts and so forth when he was not actually at work. And at work, there were some guys in the late 60s wearing, like, the golf shirts and bowling shirts and stuff like that. But this is a different time. What we're looking at here is when you're around people, you wear decent clothing and
a starch collar for dinner.
Yes, right, precisely. And it has parts and it takes time, and that's just the way life is. And then if, and there's different stuff for different activities. If you're going to go swimming, then you have swimming gear. And if you're going to go running or working out.
And by the way, let's assume that these are all people from different classes of society. You got Roland, who actually I just know from Topper, the guy who was, what was his name? He was Bly.
I can't remember because I haven't seen Topper in a super long time. But gosh, what a
yeah! He was the lead of Topper, and I mean, I've never seen him in a part that wasn't sort of this slapstick Cary Grant ghost, comedy kind of thing. And so he's playing it for laughs. So seeing him sort of in this thing where he plays clearly a guy who is not upper class at all. Right?
Does he play our lead? Is he the love interest?
No. He's the guy with the mustache. Who's Bly or Block or I've forgotten his name now. It's terrible. Okay. I don't know his name. Can you remember his name?
No, because I had a terrible time keeping track. There's 10 characters here.
Right, he was the guy who had the little mustache, who
Yes.
was a little bit older, was kind of boldish. He was one of the last guys to be alive. Anyway, if you look at Topper, he's the lead in that, and he's
Are you
great.
talking about Bloor?
Yeah, Bloor, that's him.
Mr.
Yeah,
Bloor. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, that actor was in Topper for years, and has a very particular style to him. But to see him, with a regional accent that puts him in a class that's sort of almost like not lower class exactly, but lower middle class maybe, but he's dressing too, and he's adhering to the same sort of manners in the house. It's really sort of an interesting sort of thing.
Perfectly middle class. I know the guy you're talking about, and he's a professional class is what he is. I mean, he's a cop. He's an inspector. He's a cop. His job is that sort of person who is working a job, a salary job, and moving around. Yeah, and I know precisely who you're talking about now as I look at his picture. I'd forgotten.
But not a guy who's used to hanging out in the drawing room.
No.
And, wondering what to do with his
right.
dash.
No.
So it's interesting that these are they dress for dinner, they do all this stuff, and they all have the manners that they adhere to.
Yeah.
Even if they're sort of not the ones they would typically adhere to if they were at home.
One of the best moments in this entire film, by the way. I mean, there's so many good moments, by the way. This is not a very long film, but there's an amazing the opening bit, which is completely played for comedy, but also tells us so much, where all of the people are riding together on this miserable little boat out to the island, and we just see them jostled and bouncing with the boat as it goes over the water and disgusting one another with various things. Like one guy is smoking a pipe and it's making the woman, nauseated, and another guy is nauseated by seeing the boatman eating a sandwich, and they're all put off by different things, and this whole thing takes a long time. There's no dialogue at all. And I love, by the way, the patience that the makers of this film expect us, a bunch of viewers sitting in the audience in 1945, to have. That we're going to watch this and follow it and sort of learn some things about these characters.
Well, it seems that a lot of it is you don't know anything about them. Seems like it's all done to give you some traction with them as characters, to sort of make them relatable in some kind of way. So to be in a sense, to sort of be on their side a bit and get to know them a bit before they're accused of crimes or whatever else. I mean, you just to sort of be on their side, to put yourself in their shoes in this predicament, to care about what happens to them. So very human things happen right up front, very relatable things happen up front with no dialogue. I mean, you get it, no matter who they are, you get those moments. And they even play the guy, the little dinghy, the little captain of the pilot of that boat, eating a sandwich, stalwart on the waves, making the guy sick, as he's eating that sandwich. They play him for laughs to a certain degree. A force sort of against this, and of course they do it at the end, to bring him at the end too, but as a insane rapper. But I mean, it's played to kind of give you to make them somehow relatable. Like, oh yeah, no, I totally can read that on her or on him, and I get it, with no dialogue. So I mean, it seems like it's architected in a particular way to get me to relate to them.
I wanted to mention the way we should move to the murders themselves. And one thing that I find really interesting, because the way this movie is done, if you haven't watched it and you're going to watch it after listening to this, which is always fascinating to me. And I'm not knocking it, that we have listeners to the show who listen to the discussion first and then watch the movie, which I find really interesting, and so since
that we're just trying to decide if it's worth watching or not.
It may well be, but there's a lot of violent stuff that happens in this movie, and it all happens off screen, with a couple of exceptions that I can think of. But for instance, there's a guy who gets stabbed in the back. And the way that is handled in this 1945 movie, I mean, in a Charlie Chan movie, you would have seen the guy laying there with a knife in his back. In this one, we don't even see that. Instead, afterwards, you see another character go, yes, and this is the knife that I pulled out of his back, and you put it on the table. It shows you very, very little of any of the violence that goes on, and yet there's a heck of a lot of violence. That guy gets knifed. A guy gets a big bunch of stone thrown on him, and he gets completely crushed.
Mystery.
There's a gunshot to the head.
Well, that's the one that doesn't happen.
Yeah, it's a fake, but we
Right.
don't know it's a fake. We see a guy with a bullet hole in his forehead. That actually really surprised me about a 1945 movie.
Yeah, and I guess maybe the reason they could show it is because it was fake. So they're like, that's not real.
Because they established later it wasn't real. Yeah.
I have to say the one murder that really to me was just so justified is the guy who kills the two kids while driving. He's like driving recklessly, and so he kills them. And then when he's playing the piano, he's talking about like, oh wait, I remember that. Yeah, I did kill those two people, and they took my license over it. And then they said, well, what happened to the people? Oh, they died. And he seems so like annoyed. He doesn't even seem like at all remorseful. He seems irritated that anybody's even asking. Like, hello, I just told you they took my license away. Why are you asking about those people? He's such a complete what again. I always forget which one's sociopath and which one's psychopath, but whichever one doesn't care about whether something is evil or not.
Yeah,
that's what he
would
is.
call those people planet luggage.
Yeah. So he needed to go. That was fine.
Totally.
I thought the whole bit with him singing the nursery rhyme in that sort of baritone voice was probably one of my favorite things in the movie, though, because it's so over the top, but it's also so like kind of creepily funny, which I think
it's such an earworm. You can't get it out of your head after that.
It's quite macabre.
Yeah,
it truly is just super strange. The idea of this poem, that's being read, and you guys have all been. In other words, if they have any sense in the world, they know. Holy mackerel, we've been brought to this island to be targeted for death, especially once they read, the record player reads out all of their crimes. I would think, oh, geez, we're in for it now. And one, but you're right. He's the one that you really don't feel that bad about him dying. They're all jerks. All of the deaths that they got away with are usually just from their extreme, lack of caring about others. They're all sort of an easy comic waiting to happen. And it just so happens that all of these are going to happen on one night. And here, the woman who survives and the man who survives, look what happens. They are the only two who, in this version, though not in the novel, did not actually do the crimes that they're committed.
He just is, he just took somebody else's name.
Right.
So we don't know if he's innocent or not, but we know he's not actually.
He's innocent. He's innocent of the crime that his namesake is accused of. He didn't do it, because somebody else did. He just took that guy's name. And
it's the character Lombard. He's like, I'm not Lombard. Right. And then what was she accused of?
Claythorne. She's supposed to have allowed a boy to drown, but actually it was her sister who did it.
Oh, right.
So she covered for her sister, and so everybody
it's almost
assumed,
like the Grim Reaper intervened in the plans of the killer, of the judge. We found out it was the killer.
Right, and we should get to that moment as they whittle away and finally get down to just a few people. The judge, who is the one who's doing the crimes, has manipulated it so that his character dies early so that he can continue to do the murders while staying out of sight. And he actually ends up very cleverly getting a co-conspirator who he then murders. But there's a trick that happens at the end where Miss Claythorne says to Mr. Lombard, Mr. Lombard says, "Here, shoot me." And is this the way it goes? Forgive me, but which one shoots which one? I'm trying to remember.
He says, yeah, you should shoot me, and she goes, but I'm not. If I shoot right now, I'll miss you, because she's aiming the gun away from him, and he's like, yeah, go ahead and do that.
So that way,
and then I'll drop dead.
Right. And the judge thinks that she'll be the last one living, so that she'll come up and he can say, "Well, you must hang yourself after I die."
She's not gonna hang herself. He's like, he has a noose there, but he says no. There's a noose there, but he says, "I'm gonna kill myself now because I'm actually dying anyway, and so I'm just gonna take some poison, and then it's gonna look like you did it. You did all these murders because you'll be by yourself in this house, and you'll be the only last one left living. So they're gonna hang you." Not that the noose is just
but she's expected to hang herself rather than be hanged at the gallows.
The point is, either way, she's going to.
It's the clear implication.
He's giving her the chin.
Yeah. But at the last minute, Mr. Lombard walks up. But the thing is, it is spoiled for us because we saw them come up with this plan and him fake his own death.
Yeah,
I
but I actually no.
I don't understand. Let me finish this out real quick. I completely don't understand why they don't take the obvious opportunity to have us think that she killed Mr. Lombard so that he can then appear and it'd be a nice surprise.
I guess, but then you'd have to have all the explanation about what happened at that point. And I kind of prefer to have just
a lot of
clean,
people faking death.
I guess that's true.
I prefer to have the clean death scene where all he does is kind of slightly open his eyes and go, never trust a woman.
But here's what's weird. What's weird is the last line the judge says actually has little to do with, with Lombard's fake death, even though that's really what he's reacting to, I guess. He says, his last words are, never trust a woman. And you're like, wait a minute. I'm not following. It doesn't sound like that was, unless
no, that was. He opened his eyes. He saw that Lombard was alive, so therefore she pretended to shoot him. And he's like,
Right, but it wasn't her idea. What's so funny is it wasn't her idea.
He doesn't know that.
So I know, but what we do is, so it's meant to play for us. So we're kind of going like, all right, so he believed that she concocted a plan whereby she faked his death.
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. But, in terms of how it plays for, for someone who's in on it, you're like, well, that could have been a little bit better. See, then it'd be interesting if she had concocted this plan where you just didn't know, and then, that it plays to what Jason says a whole lot better, because then they do the thing, you think he killed her, and then it turns out that she actually, from a distance, right, if you saw it blowout style from a distance, or blow up style from a distance, and you see it happen, and really she has concocted this thing, and then you realize that this was, part of her plan. That makes a whole lot more sense. But it's just weird that he says, go ahead and shoot me. She goes, but I'll miss. And he goes, do it anyway. And then the judge says at the end, never trust a woman. It's like, it's fine. It's fine. It's just not great. It doesn't put the cherry on it in the way that you would want it to, where you're like, oh, you know what? He's gone, he's failed, and he's been sort of outsmarted, and it was her. And that's really kind of cool. That's really great, as opposed to whatever it is.
We talked about this being an influence on Friday the 13th, though. And when we get into the sort of psychology of this judge character, even however briefly, I can't help but think about the Saw franchise and, how the villain talk about that is. Well, I'm not a big fan of the Saw movies. I've actually only ever seen the one of them. But this judge who essentially says, I had these two contradictory impulses. I had this really strong sense of justice, but I also had this savage bloodlust. And, so I was able to kind of curb that through my career of being a judge. Then he was diagnosed with a terminal illness, much like how the character of Jigsaw has cancer. And he decides, okay, the hell with it. If I'm going to die, I'm going to get a bunch of people who I think are, terrible.
Worthy of death.
I'm going to bump them off. I'm going to bump them off. I'm going to actually get to kill somebody hands-on instead of passing them off to the judge, the justice system. And I just can't believe that the people who made the Saw movies did not get influenced by that, even if it's just through osmosis. Like, because as Adam has pointed out, like this story has been regurgitated and remade under different names many times. I wish that almost we got to get more into the psychology of this judge character, because I thought it was one of the more. I guess I'm one of the only people. The ending didn't bother me at all. Like I was really? Okay with it. It bothered me. Yeah, it did bother me at all. I was okay with it. The only issue is I kind of once the judge is revealed as the killer, I kind of wanted for her to almost interview him a little bit more, because suddenly he became, he was always interesting to me throughout the movie, but like he became very interesting in his last few moments of life in this.
But then it was really light. But then you're saying that once he was revealed to be interesting, that it felt like it was a little light on him.
I wish there had been more of him.
I didn't like that he's the one who suggests that Mr. Unknown is actually Mr. Unknown. Like, oh look, it says Mr. Unknown. Like, that's, I guess the idea is to throw us off his track, but just kind of irritated me. I'm like, dude, if you're gonna go to all the trouble to make up like this clever name, let somebody else figure it out. But anyway, no, the part that I didn't like about the ending is the stupid thing where the guy that's the ship, the boat
At the end, that,
captain, the boat driver, the boat whatever he is, comes up and he's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, you guys ready to go?" And they're like, "Boy, are we." And then they take off. He's like, "What about the others?" Like they're like, "Call them." And I'm just like, that is
that's
so
now
stupid and cruel, because that poor guy is now going to stumble upon all these, at least one dead body, if not several.
well, now we're in the realm
Why?
of complete nonsense.
It's
Yeah,
like
I mean,
suddenly
that-
becomes a
Called the camp.
comedy.
yeah.
Yeah.
With pure
That's the part I
camp,
didn't like.
yes. Straight up 1960s style old dark house, just nonsense camp.
Yeah.
Yes. And but that's but again, that is precisely what happens also in the 1943 Phantom of the Opera. How for the end, once you're at the button, once everything's resolved, now you're in the world of one-liners and musical cues that are celebratory. And it's intended to I really believe it's intended to get everybody to break the spell of whatever gloominess may have descended during the show, and to get everybody out of their seats feeling like they've kind of enjoyed all the emotions, including giddiness. And that's just the way these films did that stuff, and they don't do it anymore. That's just simply not, I can't think of the last time I saw a film that did that, where it just completely changes its tone. So this is really my last question. Why is this such a pervasive story? Like, in other words, this book got written in 1939. It is very different from the other Agatha Christie's. I dare say it is maybe it is just as important in setting a tone for a kind of story in our culture as the Hercule Poirot, Miss Marple stories. This has become super important, and I'm curious, why is that? Like, why does this bunch of people invited to an old dark house story, why does it count for so much in our culture?
I have a thought about it, and just as maybe even as I hate to use the word straw man, but maybe as a straw man, see if any of it resonates with you, and that you can sort of pick it apart and see what's there. Considering when this was written, and actually when this picture got made, do you think that it's interesting during a time of such turmoil and suffering that this was a time when the people who were guilty in some way truly got punished? It's interesting. The people who were actually guilty got punished, and even the judge at the end dies by his own hand.
Mm-hmm.
The guilty are punished in a time when there was so much going on, where there was a lot of injustice and cruelty in the world. It seemed like I kind of halfway wonder if that this became a society was in a bit of upheaval, particularly and the different parts of society were trying to band together to overcome, World War II and other things. But I think, look at the times that remakes happened. I mean, even in the 60s and the 70s, social upheaval, political upheaval. The 70s, everybody was fucking lost in the 70s, as far as I can tell.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's got to be a certain point where it's interesting, where you go, look, you're seeing people you can relate to, but it's as much as watching them get their comeuppance in a way. And the two people who don't deserve to die don't die.
Well, and I think to your point about the judge, I don't think the judge's punishment is that he dies by his own hand. I think his punishment is that he didn't succeed in killing everybody.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and I think that's sort of interesting, and maybe that's something that we keep coming back to when we just kind of say, look, we're kind of slightly delighted. We're wondering, how will it happen? Can we figure it out? And we go, well, they're not inconsequential, but they deserve in a certain way to die because they've done these terrible things. We're told up front, and we even show that they're sort of terrible people mostly. And it's really just about the watching it all happen. But there's a world where that's terrible, but yet also where that actually makes weird sense in some way, in a world that makes no sense during the time, like in the World War II. I kind of halfway wonder if that was where people found, I don't know, where something actually made some sense, where there was something there. I don't know. There's something about it's macabre now to look at it, because I don't know, it's not the same kind of time. But I just halfway wonder if that's something that we keep coming back to. I mean, Hannibal and Saw and things like that are a little bit different, because you sort of take a certain amount of delight in all of that, maybe. but it's not. Is it the plight of the? I never felt like I was really on the judge's side for any of this. You know what I mean? Like I wasn't like,
No,
oh,
yeah.
totally. Unlike with Hannibal, you're like, I kind of want to see what Hannibal's going to do. Like there's something about it where you know he's a particular kind of character, of mass murderer. Dexter, even, right? We're looking at somebody who clearly is a mass murderer, but he is taking on people who are worse than him in a certain kind of way, people who deserve to be punished, and those things become popular in a particular way. But I had no real connection to the judge in this, but it's not that kind of show.
I think it's a lot more. It just so happens, the mystery always has to be resolved, and somebody has to be responsible, right? In this case, it's the judge. I think what keeps people coming back is not even the guessing game. I think they like the situation. The idea of a whole bunch of people in an exotic place where somebody's going to be killing them one by one. I think is just exciting, and the better you can do making each of the characters memorable, so you have favorites and less favorites and people you root for and so forth. You can't have a final girl unless you have a bunch of people who are in one spot, so that in the end, one of them can come out on top. And that's it is like the most pure expression of the way that we think of like Hollywood movies anyway, where you cross into the special world, right? And so forth. But in movies like this, there's always an ensemble. There might be a favorite, but there's always an ensemble. And the special world is where all of them go, and they all do a little bit of their shtick. Because think about it, the movie's like 100 minutes long. There's really only time for each of the characters to have about 4 minutes of screen time. Really, that like each of them has only a little bit of attention, and they've got to do their thing. And some of them are going to get killed. I think people just really enjoy seeing this idea being repeated over and over again, whether it's an army base or an island or a modern house that's been reopened, like in House on Haunted Hill, or a museum or whatever. I think you could keep doing this over and over and over again, and people are going to keep enjoying it.
If I may,
Please.
I think the reason why we keep going back to this particular story, and we're actually we saw two sort of echoes of this coming. There's Knives Out coming out in a few months. There was Ready or Not over the summer, which are essentially modernizations of the same kind of story. And they fill a specific different need. We've been talking a lot about how this informed the slasher genre, and in particular Friday the 13th. But Friday the 13th features middle class and working class protagonists. It's not the same as this. It doesn't have that upper crust veneer. And I think there is a particular need when you are, as the media would put it, a one percenter, that you might not necessarily always want to see the rich come out on top, that you might want to have them reminded that no matter how much money they have, they are mortal, same as the rest of us. And I think there's always going to be an audience, for good or for ill, to see the wealthy get bumped off, for them to sort of get their comeuppance. And that is why this story might be necessary. And I think that's also why you have like the two endings of it, because you have the original Christie novel, which is a little more cynical and probably more in line with what I'm saying, is that, maybe the wealthy need to be reminded that they don't have all the power and they are not above justice. And that justice is waiting for all of us in the end. And then you have this movie, which is a little bit more sugar-coated towards the end. And I think there's room for both. But as far as the pervasiveness of this particular style, I think it's just that seeing the wealthy get killed is always a marketable idea.
Yeah.
It's always fun.
Yeah. Excellent point. Okay. Well, we should finally get our final thoughts on And Then There Were None. So we started with Adam. So it was Adam, Julia, Drew, and then I'll say goodbye. So Adam, final thoughts, And Then There Were None, 1945.
Look, I am actually really glad that I saw this. This is not one that I had really thought that I'd miss, because if I thought back on when the original one was made, I kind of went back to one that was not quite as early as this one. So I'm glad I saw it. I think it definitely is a window into a time and a particular kind of of picture making and a particular kind of story is being told a certain way. And it was it's great Sunday afternoon fare to sort of to watch on, however you come at it, YouTube or whatever else, or find it out in the world. And I think it really is it's a fascinating bridge between the novel and sort of what we see in more recent times. So and I'm also, it's interesting to sort of trace back its influence in a bunch of other different stories that are more modern. So I think as an evergreen trope, and I think as a sort of kind of story, I think it's really super interesting. So I'm glad to see this particular version of it. I really want to see the 2015 version, particularly if it has a more modern adaptation of some of the themes and the elements, and we can put what Drew says actually to the test and kind of say, okay, does this come forward with in this more modern take? Is it still interesting to punish the haves, particularly when they're sort of disassociated from humanity and from behaving well? If that still is an evergreen thing and told a particular way and it still has legs, I think that's really interesting. So I think it was really great. I'm glad you chose it. I wasn't really sure how you arrived at this when I heard you were doing it, but now I sort of understand it. So I'm kind of glad we saw it.
We chose it because Julia demanded it.
No, I didn't demand it.
We turn
next.
That's
my choice when I was told to pick something.
Yes. Well, yeah. Actually, truly, what happened was we come to this sort of turn in the bend of the year, where it's about October. School's getting started, and we always kind of stop for a few just personal choices. And so in this case, Joya's choice was "And Then There Were None," because it just sort of struck her fancy that it had something to do with something, a proto slasher of sorts. So Julia, and thank you, Adam. Julia, final thoughts.
I think there's a few things that we didn't even touch on. Number one is the adorable kitty cat that kind of shows up throughout the movie, and super cute. I don't know what the point of the kitty cat is. Maybe he's just supposed to be us, just observing. And the poor elderly, the kind of older grumpy lady, Mrs. Brent, I guess. Is she Mrs. Brent, or which one is she? She's anyways, the one that's not Vera and not the wife, not the maid. She also is there and is not particularly memorable, but she is treated with respect by the film. I think this movie, it doesn't have any minority characters, at least not this 1945 version. It has two women, and they're not treated three women, one of whom is a servant, but none of them are treated in any particularly offensive way, aside from just how servants are treated. So I think that's, I'm kind of examining, going back through, it's like, what is it that I would have wanted to see? So I'm curious about the 2015 version to see what, if there's any minorities in it and how the women are treated and that kind of thing. But I think other than that, if it had a little bit of a different ending, it would be a pretty solid film. But I really enjoyed watching it, and I'm glad that we did.
Thank you. Drew, final thoughts.
I really loved this movie, and in fact, talking about it made me like it even more. Again, this hit a lot of personal happy spots. I like almost anything that takes place in a big, sprawling, spooky mansion with a spooky atmosphere, and this very much had that. And going into Halloween season, this is often the kind of movie that really, one of the kinds of movies I like to watch this time of year. So thank you, Julia, for your choice. I hope that this, if any of our listeners have overlooked this movie, I hope this podcast brings some attention to it, and people put it in their rotation, because it's certainly a cracking good time. Like it's not a drag. People sometimes assume old movies will be like, it's very relentlessly entertaining, and just a good time, and it's on YouTube for free, so you have no excuse not to watch it.
Yeah. Very, very good. All I would add to that is that, honestly, I swear to God, one of these years, Drew, I'm just going to go, okay, starting January 1 until next December 31st, I'm not going to watch anything made past 1949. And I bet you would find so many mind-blowing gems.
But we would not watch anything together, sadly.
Well, I mean,
because I only like to watch stuff that's made like now.
Last night we were dipping into the 80s, and we watched if you could believe this, Girls Just Want to Have Fun, which is a movie with Sarah Jessica Parker and Helen Hunt from like 80, I don't know, 86, I guess. And we
also just came back from watching.
You say that, Julia, but you picked this movie out.
That's true.
So yes, I'm not talking about for the podcast.
Yeah, so explain that to me, Joyce.
For the podcast, I prefer the old movies because I like not having all the blood and gore, and they tend to be less gory. No, I don't like gory things, but I do like watching the show. Like I've been watching the Emmys tonight, and I like watching really good television that's being made right now and films as well. And so we went to see Downton Abbey, which I mean I wouldn't spend a year without watching Downton Abbey if I had the opportunity to watch more Downton Abbey. Why would I do that to myself? That would be stupid.
I think Jason's idea, for the record, I think Jason's idea is a little extreme. However, you can, in this wonderful, well, not completely wonderful, but as far as entertainment options go, wonderful era that we live in. The good news is you can have it both ways, and you can watch both vintage movies at ease and contemporary movies. And I like to do both because I find enjoyment out of the comparison. So, I think you should join Jason in watching some old movies. I think you would find some enjoyment out of them.
Well, I do watch some. I was talking about the whole 1 year of not watching anything.
Oh, 1 year is that's a little much.
Yeah, I don't mind
for me. Who just earlier explained at length why I spend most of my life in a suit and tie if I can get away with it. Like that's a little much for me.
I just think it would be really.
While you're with Jamie.
I would love to. I think it'd be very interesting to go nothing created after December of 1949. And just see, and just go deep, just go
do
super
it for
deep.
like a month, not for a whole year.
God, you don't think it's possible? I think it's totally possible.
I just think it would be sad that you wouldn't watch any of my shows with me, is all.
Oh, that's so sweet. That's kind of
you. For the sake of your marriage, Jason.
Exactly.
Don't do this experiment.
That's right. Yes.
All right. Well, let's see.
Or you can only choose.
Dr.
You can only
Polidori,
choose things for
back.
you. Sorry, Adam. But Adam, what did you say?
No, I'm here. No, I was just saying, turn back, Dr. Polidori. It's
Yeah. How about this, Jason? For your own choices, you can only choose those, but then you join me for a few things that I pick, like one thing a week.
Maybe we make it an hours thing. So except between the hours of 6 and 9.
We'll keep everyone posted if we end up doing anything like that.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see how this turns out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Let's. I'd love to get endorsements because I know we've got some fun stuff to talk about. The same order, stuff that you are reading or watching or whatever that has really sparked your mind and set you to thinking, and it can be really anything. We call them endorsements, but.
Hello?
Are you all still there? Did they? And with
yeah.
that,
Did we lose Jason?
Gone.
We lost Jason.
Talking.
Okay. All right, we have you back. We have you back. We lost.
Okay, so Adam, what do you have for us this week?
Boy, there's so much stuff going on. Obviously, the Emmys are happening right now. And another time, I heard some stuff today that's too early to talk about, but it's really interesting. It's more like in the political climate that we're entering into, which is vaguely horrifying on a daily basis. I saw some stuff that kind of got me thinking, but I'm setting that aside for two things. One is I ran across something which you guys may be familiar with. It's super genre, but it's really overlooked. It's a film with Bela Lugosi and the Ritz brothers called The Gorilla. Mm-hmm. And the Ritz brothers, if you're not familiar with them, funny. They're not the Marx brothers. They're the Ritz brothers.
Yeah.
And it's in that same sort of I'll even call it a milieu, but it's really it's a very odd, offbeat picture that has Bela Lugosi in it. And
what did you say it's called?
It's called The Gorilla.
The Gorilla.
I saw it many years ago in Los Angeles when I was a kid, and it was.
This is not the same movie as Bela Lugosi meets the Brooklyn Gorilla?
No, it's different.
You're kidding. There's more than one. Different. That's astonishing to me. Okay. All right.
Let's say recut it and re-release it as something else.
No. I think you're exactly right, because I think Bela Lugosi Meets the Brooklyn Gorilla is a Dead End Kids movie.
The Dead End Kids. Weirdly enough, I'm related to one of the Dead End Kids, which is another other odd offbeat story. But who also was one of the producers of The Beast of 20,000 Fathoms. Weirdly enough,
that is mind blowing. Okay,
but this is an odd thing that I picked up as I was going through some stuff. I remember I had gone into a place where a video store was closing. God knows, I probably drove back the next day and it was gone. It had never been there. It was one of those, cursed or charmed video stores that was going out of business, and I found this thing called The Gorilla with the Ritz Brothers and Bela Lugosi, and it was incredibly interesting because it was also of a time, and also these guys were great, but they were not the Marx Brothers. The other thing is, as you know, I've been with HBO for a while. And one of the things that we have released, which is really interesting, and I'm sort of throwing it out there not because I worked on it, but because it actually is really interesting, and that is there is in the area of VR just released something called Westworld Awakening, which is
that sounds interesting.
A 5-act, 6-hour experience in VR that is extremely interesting. So I'm throwing it out there as as being one who likes certainly agency, player agency in a particular story in a world that has a lot of thematic elements and a lot of in the fabric of the world of the show Westworld, as Jonah Nolan and Lisa Joy have put together for the show. It's in that same world. So it's extremely interesting. I'm throwing it out there. If you haven't tried it, or if people who have listened to this podcast haven't tried it, it certainly is worth trying. So I'm throwing it out there. It's incredibly thought-provoking, very interesting, and stands in the area of capital T transmedia as it not only can stand alone, but also in the context of the series and where it's going.
For what it's worth, Adam, Upload VR magazine called it a haunting VR experience. So it's getting good notices. So that's
really
it's
actually been really, really well received, which I like. I mean, VR itself is my coming out of large scale console franchises. It's a different area, but since I ran story there and I'm running story here, it's this is the part that we certainly double down on, and particularly HBO doubles down on, and the voice of creatives and things like that, and also really interesting things you wouldn't see anywhere else. And this is sort of that same sort of animal. So it's sort of one of the first ones out there that's like this.
Very cool. Wow, it blows my mind that we're into VR video games now. So that's
right.
It's our VR experiences, I suppose. Wow, thank you. Julia, what do you have to endorse for us?
I already mentioned Downton Abbey. I just loved Downton Abbey. It was so good. It was just beautiful to look at. Everything, the details they managed to always capture are just remarkable to me. I mean, the clothing is beyond. I've never seen such gorgeous clothing in my life. All of the the silver and the crystal and the beautiful buildings and the cars and just everything, every last detail is just so beautiful. And plus, of course, I think if you've never seen Downton Abbey, it's not going to be as impactful because a lot of it's just, hey, what have our old friends been up to, but it's a neat story. It is a standalone story, but a lot of it's just, checking in with a bunch of characters that we all got to know watching the series. So, if you ever watched Downton Abbey, for sure watch it. If you didn't, then go check out a few episodes and then go see the movie. But it's really, really neat.
Thank you very much. We had a double feature night at the movies where we went to see Downton Abbey, and then we split up and each went to see a different film.
Yeah, so the second movie I saw was Ad Astra, which was okay. I was really sleepy at that point, so I think I probably need to see it again before I can actually fairly evaluate it. I just kept going. No, I mean I didn't fall asleep, but I was just like, this is really feels very slow, and I think it might be because I was really tired. So I need to see it again to see if it's actually as slow as I felt like it was.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So excellent. Mr. Drew, what about you?
Two things. Impersonal, personal. First one, impersonal. I just saw Rocket Man on Amazon last night. I guess I was behind the rest of the world, which
Are
is
you talking
a
about the one from
musical.
the 80s? The with
No. The movie about
Oh, I'm sorry. I
Elton
apologize.
John.
I thought you were talking about Timothy Dalton,
No.
Rocket Man.
No,
Okay,
no.
never mind.
the musical biopic of Elton John, which I loved it. I thought in many ways this was the movie that Bohemian Rhapsody probably shouldn't have been. While that movie had some good performances and a lot of technical razzle dazzle, particularly in the concert scenes, this had a lot more heart and it's a lot more entertaining. And honestly, kind of made me rethink about how we should probably do rock and roll biopics. This movie, is both a biopic and a musical, literally, with big musical numbers and everything, using Elton John's music. And I think it's a better way, because you can never condense a person's entire life into a 2-hour, even 4-hour movie. It just can't be done. So I think when we're talking about people who are mostly known about music, well, music can be used to translate into a kind of feeling that even a film can't quite capture. So I actually think this is one of the most novel approaches to a rock and roll biopic that I've ever seen. And actually, I think more biopics should, when they're following musicians, maybe they should follow this approach, because it just, to me, really really worked, and I just enjoyed it quite a bit. I know it's not horror or sci-fi or any of the stuff we normally, it's very removed from the stuff we normally talk about on the show, but I think it's got enough going for it that I think our listeners would enjoy it.
Julia
anyway.
talked about Masterpiece Theater, so you're all right. It's
So personal plug, as Jason mentioned earlier, I am again a nominee for the Austin Chronicle Best of Austin Awards. Last year I won, even though I was kind of, in my opinion, an underdog candidate. But it was just me and Donnie Cates last year. 2 people. This year I am up against 4 people, all of which they're very talented, and I'm sure wonderful people. I don't know any of them very well, but very talented people, all with a lot of mainstream credibility that me, as somebody that does an indie comic, doesn't necessarily have. And I can tell you, not only did winning this award last year, it was one of the biggest joys in my entire life, like, just period. It really helped my career, and it gives me, as an indie comic, quite a bit more credibility that I don't necessarily have normally. So, as magnanimous as I am being to the other people who I am competing with, I still want to win. I want to win again. I'm in there.
Yeah.
And so I am calling upon Texans who listens to this, please, or former Texans, once and future Texans. People.
Well, I think if I recall correctly, I don't think it let us vote if we didn't live there. I think you had to say where you lived or something.
You have to have a Texas zip code,
right? And so
do with that information what you will. I'm certainly not anything. I am, however, calling upon the people who listen to this podcast, who are in the right area. Please vote for me. Every vote chances. And as much as I was the underdog last year, I feel like I'm 4 times over the underdog this year, even though I am the sort of the defending champion, so to speak. And look, if you like the other people more than me, if you think they make better work, I understand that. They're all very talented. Again, I can't argue that. But I can say that this, I can say that this does help me keep doing what I love to do, and it helps me reach a broader audience than I normally would. So it does mean a lot to me, and in a way that might not necessarily mean as much to somebody who is working for Marvel or DC. And that's the note I'm going to leave it on, because I don't want to sound overly competitive, other than I will honestly say, yes, of course I want to win. Anyway, sermon over. I'm done.
Hello? Did we lose Jason
Nice.
again? Hello?
Jason?
Jason gone?
Yeah, I think we lost him yet again.
Okay, all right, I'm back. Can you hear me now?
Okay.
Okay.
You disappeared
All right,
on
I'm
us.
gonna have so much editing to do, but it's okay. But I got everything. I got everything that
Sermon done. The house
Yes,
is brought down.
perfect. Okay, my endorsements. First of all, by the way, I did. Joy and I watched Downton Abbey, which of course I loved. The heart soars at every fan service moment in that movie, and it is completely a fan service movie, and it's awesome. Loved it. And then she went to watch Brad Pitt in space, and I went to watch Rambo. And Rambo, the craziest thing about Rambo, and I think that if you're into action movies, you should totally watch Rambo. But what I thought was really crazy is that this is the first Rambo movie where I got the distinct impression watching it that it was not actually a Rambo movie until maybe very late at some point in its development. Because that movie doesn't need Rambo. It just needs a rancher who speaks Spanish and lives near the border. And this is Rambo. All of a sudden, Rambo has a niece that he's been raising, and this old lady, and all the dialogue is half in Spanish. And then she goes to get herself kidnapped by the drug cartels, and then he has to go down and try to get her, and then it's a revenge thing with the drug cartels. And there's nothing here that is Rambo, other than some, sure, once he actually has to slaughter a bunch of cartel guys, he can use Rambo style stuff. But really, it struck me as being just like Die Hard 3, where that was called Simple Simon. It was a story called Simple Simon that then they acquired to be Die Hard 3, and likewise, I think Die Hard 2 was a story called 60 Minutes that got picked up to become Die Hard 2. So it's very interesting. You watch it, I thought it was a good throwback. A lot of people are reading a great deal of politics into it, and I really have to say, you're thinking too hard about this movie. This is this is an excuse for guys that wipe out a whole lot of drug cartel guys. Neat film. I earlier said that I thought Rocket Man was the movie from the 80s with Timothy Dalton. That was The Rocketeer. Just want to point that out.
Right.
That movie's from the early 90s.
It's from the early 90s? The Rocketeer?
Yeah, I love The Rocketeer.
Are you sure
one of my favorite. I'm not 100% sure, but
no, I'm sure that you're right. I'm sure that you are correct.
Just my 1991. Just double check.
All right.
That's one of my favorite comic book movies of all time.
Well, when you said Rocket Man, I thought when you said Rocket Man, I thought you were talking about The Rocketeer. So there we go.
Nope.
I mean, once you started talking about Elton John, yes, then I understood. But until that moment, I was like, well. So anyway, I got one last thing. I have never been an American Horror Story guy. Nothing against them. I just have never gotten into it because I've been, it takes hours and time to write books and watch all these episodes of Peyton Place. So I just haven't been able to watch.
Not to mention all the horror movies that we were to watch on the podcast.
Sure, yeah. So I haven't been able to watch American Horror Story. But I did start watching the new one, which is called AHS 84. And it is a pastiche of Halloween and Friday the 13th and a whole bunch of other 80s stuff. The color looks good. The grain looks good. The performances are fantastic. It's full of Easter eggs.
That's not one that I'm a fan of, though. Gotta say, that's not going to be one.
Bloody as all heck. I mean, it is.
It's not going to be one that counts for what we watch together to make.
It is astonishingly bloody for something on basic cable.
Oh, American Horror Story is always gratuitously over the top.
Yeah. So having said that, it's really, really cool, and I recommend it. So there we go. Matthew Morrison, by the way, if you liked him on Glee, he is back as muscle bound. He's a muscle bound. He works at the camp. I can't remember. It's about a whole bunch of people who. It's 1984. Los Angeles is going to be a sunbaking madhouse because the Olympics are happening. So a bunch of kids from around this particular gym take a job at a camp that's opening up after a big slaughter that happened like 17 years earlier. So that's what it is.
What could go wrong?
so it's so there's just all kinds of things. There's Vietnam anxiety, there's 80s music. It's great. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our discussion of And Then There Were None, 1945. I am so excited that we got a chance to talk about this. Adam, as always, it's a pleasure to have you on. If this is your first time listening to the show, go listen to the interview that we just did with Bridget Nelson in the past week. That was a lot of fun. Go listen to old episodes. Come to the Facebook page. Tell us what you want to hear. Stick with us through October. It's going to be a great month, and we really appreciate it. Everybody be excellent to one another. Bye.
Night.
Night.
Good night.
Bye.